All right, we've got a lot to cover in this video. First video for my channel, a little channel called Loose Hooks. So who am I? My name is Matthew O'Brien. I live in the Omaha metro area. I am a full-time YouTuber. I have a channel with 33,000 subscribers where I teach Final Cut Pro, do filmmaking, Apple tech, and then whatever other random videos I come up with about the cool stuff that I find out there to get into. Old hard drives, retro tech, old cameras, all that. I have a second channel that's all about photography, urban landscape, street photography, where I use old digital cameras and old film cameras. I don't appear on the channel. I just showcase what the camera is and the photos that I get. I have these video clips that I put in there to kind of make these what I call vibescapes. So you can just like watch the video and kind of vibe out and just enjoy some photography. That channel has 1,100 subscribers, and I started this channel because I have gotten back to collecting music in the form of vinyl records, and it has meant a lot to me and my mental health and my happiness, and it has been a great way to connect and build community with people in the Omaha area and beyond. And I don't want to create a channel that I have to spend the rest of my life maintaining, but I want to think about this channel more as a project. If I collect vinyl for the next year and then just kind of here and there after that, it doesn't warrant a vinyl haul video, I won't post anything. But while I'm in the sort of fever dream of reconnecting with music and collecting vinyl and purchasing vinyl and then flipping it for a profit at local record shops or maybe even online, maybe even through this channel, I want to document that journey and that process because I really enjoy doing that kind of like a journal or a diary of something that means a lot to me, even if only for a short period of time. I'm 46 years old. So music for me really started to play a role in my life early on. I'm going to go into my music history with some of the music that I listened to in different phases of my life. But I grew up with parents who played records when we cleaned the house on the weekend. Billy Joel, the Footloose soundtrack, Elton John, things like that would play in our home while we worked and cleaned the house, cleaned my bedroom, whatever. My parents, when we would drive around, would listen to, I grew up in the Chicago area, they would listen to a radio station, Oldies 104.3. Oldies 104.3. And they would play music from the 50s, 60s, and maybe even the early 70s. But these were oldies like Buddy Holly, the Beatles, the Beach Boys. I'm wearing a Beach Boys concert tour shirt right now. Jan and Dean, the Hollies, all that kind of stuff, those classic oldies songs. So pre-classic rock, so it wasn't like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and psychedelic rock and all that. You know, in the mid-'80s, I had an older sister, and she was from my dad's previous marriage, so she would be with us on the weekends or every other weekend, and MTV was huge. So she would watch MTV, and I would watch with her because she was my older sister. I looked up to her. She was about 6 years older than me. She was cool. I wanted to hang out with her. And she would watch music videos. So I would see music from INXS, Depeche Mode, U2, REM, The Cure, all of those quintessential 80s bands. And some of the music that I collect now is inspired by that, especially the music like The Cure and Depeche Mode, where I wasn't as into it as a kid, but it sort of made an imprint on me on a subconscious level that has resurfaced later in my life. Now, during that time, the music that we had access to listen to was my dad's old collection of 45s. He had a pretty big collection of rock records, everything from Bob Dylan, which is folk, I understand, and kind of moves into rock after Highway 61 Revisited. But you know, Bob Dylan, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, you know, Grateful Dead, all of that kind of stuff. But we never really accessed those. So my brother and I had some 45s of our own, like Jump by Van Halen, Eat It by Weird Al Yankovic, I Can't Drive 55 by Sammy Hagar. But we also had my dad's old 45s, which was everything from the Beach Boys, Jan and Dean, the Hollies, the Turtles, the Beatles, of course, all of that kind of stuff. And we would play those records while we were screwing around or doing whatever. And sometimes we would use a tape cassette player that had dual cassettes, and we would record our own little radio stations, and we would make funny voices and DJ different shows, kind of like a YouTube channel. And then we would play the 45 like we were running a radio station. And that was sort of our early access to music. And then I had started a cassette collection, which was mainly consisted of REM cassettes and a few others here and there. And then I got a CD player. And then my music interest really shifted after I saw Star Wars, and when I was 14 I saw Jurassic Park in the movie theater, and I went all in on John Williams soundtracks, especially Star Wars and Jurassic Park and a few other movies, E.T., things like that. There were a few other soundtracks I was interested in, but mainly from other composers, but mainly I just stuck with John Williams. So I had a little CD player, and I would just listen to the Star Wars soundtracks over and over again, Jurassic Park over and over again, while having those movies playing on a VCR in my bedroom. And then grunge really hit 1991. Nirvana's Nevermind came out. We, of course, had Pearl Jam's 10 album. This stuff was on repeat on MTV constantly. So I was both watching it on MTV and then listening to the CDs at home. And then, as things evolved, Smashing Pumpkins came into the fold, a little bit of Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, things like that. And that grunge movement really started taking up a lot of time with the music that I was listening to. And then I shifted again, made another left turn. A friend of mine that I grew up with who had left the area and moved back, he had a driver's license because he was older than me. We would drive around and he would listen to The Doors. And he listened to it so much that it just kept imprinting on me. And my dad had a Doors greatest hits record, but we never really listened to it. My dad liked the Doors, but he had moved on from music. He wasn't really listening to anything. So then I went hard and got all the Doors CDs, their live records, and started going through their catalog endlessly. And for a good year to 2 years, I was really listening to the Doors primarily. And then like on the radio here in Chicago, or in the Chicago area, we had Q101. So you'd be listening to alternative music, Bush, of course, Weezer, that was a big one for me, the Blue Album, and then eventually Pinkerton, bands like Nada Surf, The Offspring, stuff like that was in heavy rotation, both on MTV, on Q101, and then in friend circles. One of the girls I dated listened to Incubus, The Verve. I listened to Oasis a ton. What's the Story? Morning Glory was on constant rotation for me as well. And, that's really what my musical life was in high school. And then later on, I started moving more into pop punk ska. The gateway drug for that was No Doubt and their Tragic Kingdom album. I started going deeper, listening to Less Than Jake, Goldfinger, Real Big Fish, and really responded a lot to that high tempo, super energetic, just, anthemic music for me. That was great for driving around in the summer, windows down, going on dates, going out with my friends, all of that stuff. So those albums were really, really huge for me. And then high school wrapped up. I moved into college. I went to Iowa State University my first year, walking around with the Discman, and I was listening to the Goldfinger's second album, Hang Ups. I was listening to Save Ferris. I was listening to Less Than Jake still. Pearl Jam's Yield album had come out, and I was listening to that pretty heavily. And then some bands that had like a hit song, but like the rest of the album wasn't all that great. One that sticks out to me is Chumbawamba and their song Tub Thumping. Listened to that a lot, but the rest of the CD, wasn't really something that I responded to. Now this is internet age, but this is sort of pre-Napster, or at least I wasn't aware of Napster at the time, so there really wasn't any way for me at that point to really be downloading music. So I didn't have a lot of money, so I also couldn't necessarily just go to the record store or Best Buy or whatever and buy a $13, $14, $15 CD whenever I felt like it. So I was really relying on a lot of the CDs I already had, and on occasion getting new CDs, whether it was a birthday gift, Christmas, or whatever. I had done like Columbia House and BMG and all that, but I just felt bad because I would get all those free CDs up front and then usually fail to fulfill the obligation of the contract. And while no serious repercussions occurred, I just felt like I was taking advantage of what they offered through those clubs. After Iowa State, I moved back home to the Chicago area, went to the University of Illinois, and some of the music that I was listening to then was, continuing to listen to Weezer. The Green album had come out. I was listening to Blink 182. Wheatus had that big hit, Teenage Dirtbag. The rest of the album, nothing super memorable. That was a song that I remember listening to a lot. Ben Folds, not only Ben Folds 5, but when Ben Folds went solo and had his Rock in the Suburbs album, that I was listening to in early college extensively. Some of my college friends, again, Napster had come out, downloading music digitally for free. People were listening to bands like OAR. There was a band, God, what was the name of that band? It was from the Chicago suburbs. Lucky Boys Confusion, that was a big one that we listened to a lot. Of course, Beastie Boys, all that stuff was going on in college, but I wasn't as focused on obviously buying music because you could illegally download it. And usually I would just share my friends' downloaded libraries. They would put it on a hard drive and give it to me. I would load it into my Windows machine through Winamp and play music at parties and all that stuff then. But again, wasn't really like searching for new music. And then I graduated and moved back to Chicago. So some of the music influences I had were the Shins. I had found Oh Inverted World and loved that. That movie Garden State came out. There was a lot of music on there that was really influential, including the album by a band called Frou Frou. I can't remember what the album name was. That one was one that got a lot of rotation. Of course, continuing to listen to Weezer with Maladroit. That was one that got heavy rotation. And then one of the big ones was the Postal Service, their album Give Up. I probably listened to a bazillion times. I was also listening to Modest Mouse, the Caesars. Andrew WK had heavy rotation between his I Get Wet album and then The Wolf. Those were being played a lot. And then I started really trying to research some other bands, stuff that was more under the radar, using the internet to try to find new artists. So I found Ladytron. Arcade Fire was well known, but they hadn't really fallen on my radar. That song Rebellion Lies was a huge song for me that I played all the time in my car. But I started getting into Magnetic Fields. Lost in Translation came out. And although I didn't go down the Jesus and Mary Chain rabbit hole, I was listening to Just Like Honey all the time. I had that song on repeat pretty much constantly. And so music like that was really starting to influence me. And I brought that with me to grad school, went down to Florida State University for grad school with music like a band called Miracle Fortress out of Quebec. Continuing to listen to Arcade Fire, the album Neon Bible had come out. The Shins had Shoots Too Narrow, and then they had Wincing the Night Away, which came out while I was in college, and that was on repeat. Bruce Springsteen's record, Magic, I listened to that a ton. Those were a lot of my big influences. I had a newer car. It had a 6-disc CD player, so I could load up those 6 discs and just listen to stuff as it came through. We didn't have smartphones quite yet. The iPhone had been released while I was in grad school, but it wasn't like you could just have it in your car using cellular connection to stream music, so we were still reliant primarily on CDs. One CD that was pretty huge for me while I was in Chicago and at grad school was by a band from Chicago called Pulsars, and this was Dave Trumpio's band. Just a really awesome poppy electronic. Had a hit song called Suffocation, and then a bunch of other songs. It's one of those records I can listen to the whole thing through and really love it. Kind of adjacent to the Postal Service Give Up. Of course, there were other albums, the Decemberists, was listening to them a lot, but those were the CDs that really got heavy rotation. And then my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, we moved to Los Angeles, California, and music interest started tapering, flatlining a little bit, but I remember seeking out the new Arcade Fire record that came out. It was The Suburbs, and I listened to that constantly on my way back and forth from work when I was living in Los Angeles. continued listening to the Shins, Weezer, all of that stuff, and started branching out a little bit because I was pursuing screenwriting. I was researching different music for for different things. So Iggy Pop, Arlo Guthrie, got back into grunge a little bit because the character I was writing was inspired by Kurt Cobain as a young adult. So listening to a lot of that stuff. But my fixation on writing and screenwriting really made me focus more on movies and reading than listening to music. And because money was tight, I wasn't buying a lot of new music. I was just listening to the CDs that I already had because I had, probably a 150 plus CD collection. And then we fell on hard times in Los Angeles. We had moved during the start of the Great Recession in 2008. And a few years later, we were in debt and had to move back to Omaha to try to recover. Part of what I did to try to stave off that decision was I sold a lot of my music collection to Amoeba Music in Los Angeles. And a lot of the records that I didn't listen to regularly were taken in and sold. Ska compilations, punk music, ska music that never really took hold with me. There was that swing movement like with Cherry Poppin' Daddies and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, stuff like that I had. And so I unloaded a lot of those CDs and even some of my cassettes to try to, get a little bit of money so I could survive in Los Angeles. So then Los Angeles doesn't work out. We move back to Omaha. I'm in my early 30s. And between the time I'm 30 to, just a little while ago, maybe 44, 43 years old, I'm not really listening to a lot of music. We still had my Mazda, so we're relying on CDs. I wasn't buying new CDs at all. I wasn't spending any money on music. I wasn't even bothering to download stuff to then play from my phone to my car. My Mazda didn't have an auxiliary jack, so it was a pain to connect it to the FM radio and kind of have it play shittily across the FM radio. So I either just listened to NPR or other radio stations, or would sometimes on long distance trips have earpods in and just listen to podcasts over my phone. At home, I wasn't listening to any music. I didn't have a stereo. We didn't have things like a HomePod or a music streaming device. I didn't play stuff over my computer, when we were just hanging out, reading or, whatever. So there was a really long dead time where just music was not a part of my life at all. And then we got a HomePod Mini, signed up for Apple Music. We had recovered financially quite a bit, had a little bit of money to invest in subscribing to Apple Music. So I did that and started creating playlists for jazz music. I just found that when I would go out to dinners with my friend Nick, we would go to kind of these swanky steakhouses when he would come to town. He's, a little more well-to-do than I was, and he likes to go to quiet places that kind of have that, 1940s, 50s vibe to it. And I just really liked the vibe of those places. And they would play everything from Sinatra to Rat Pack to bebop jazz, hard bop jazz, smooth, sort of West Coast jazz from back then. And so I started putting jazz playlists together just to have a vibe going while I worked on videos for my YouTube channel. And I wouldn't even really pay a lot of attention to who the jazz musician was. I would just add it to this playlist. And I was adding stuff from John Coltrane and Miles Davis, Keith Jarrett, modern jazz from some European bands, stuff that came out in the last 10 years or so. But I wasn't focusing on albums, artists, songs. I was just setting a vibe. And then as I continued my YouTube channel, I would use my iPhone to sometimes stream jazz music through my truck. I picked up a Ford F-150. It had CarPlay. I would mostly listen to podcasts and the radio, to be honest, NPR. But from time to time, I would call up that jazz playlist and just listen to the jazz music while I drove around, which was great. And then I started getting into photography. And I would go to thrift stores and then eventually estate sales looking for cameras to use on my photography channel, these digicams. But then I would have some that I didn't want to use, but they were worth money, so I would sell them. started going to more and more estate sales looking for cameras to buy. And sometimes I would come up empty handed and I would go, what's here that has some value that I could go and sell easily? Books, vintage clothing, and vinyl records. I understood that vinyl records had value. My brother-in-law was a vinyl record collector. I went to one estate sale and saw a couple crates of vinyl records, and I was trying to text my brother-in-law if any of them were a good price because I had no clue what records were worth or how much we should spend on them. And I'm going through, and it's Led Zeppelin, a bunch of 80s stuff. There was a original UK copy of U2's Zooropa record, and I wanted like $10 for it. And I'm like, wow, $10 is a lot for an old record. By the time I texted my brother-in-law and he told me that was an original UK pressing and I should definitely buy it, it had already been picked up by somebody else. So I missed out on that opportunity. And that really kind of struck me. I was like, wow, something I could buy for $10 is worth $125. And we have record shops here in Omaha. I could take that record that I bought for 10 and they might give me $50, $60 for it and then still make profit on the rest. So I started looking at vinyl records, and a couple of estate sales had some amazing jazz records, some Coltrane records, one Coltrane record that was worth over $100. And I was able to put together a simple vintage stereo setup just so I could listen to these records to see if I actually wanted to sell them or hang on to them myself. And that's when things really went into motion. I had a stereo, and I would find these vinyl records at these estate sales and then starting to go to thrift stores. And these records were either cool to me, jazz records, and some of these were like kind of lame jazz comps, stuff that most jazz collectors would get rid of or not even buy. But it was a gateway into learning who these artists were, learning about John Coltrane, about Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, Wayne Shorter, all of these incredible jazz musicians from the 50s and 60s. And then I started a relationship with some of the local record shops and saying, hey, I find a lot of these records at estate sales. Can I bring them in and sell them to you, either for credit or cash and all that? And so I started that process, formed relationships with those record stores, and found myself more and more often keeping some of the records that I was picking up and selling, slightly fewer of them. But on occasion, if I did well on some records, I would use some of the money that I made to trade in for other records. And I've gotten to the point where I have about 300 records in my collection. And in the last, month or two, it's been growing pretty quickly because I found ways to get records that are really exciting to me very inexpensively, like $1 each or $3 each. So now I'm really all in. And this has been going on for the last close to a year now, where I have been acquiring these records. And there's some that I have regretted selling, some that I let go. That was dumb, one in particular, and I'll tell that story in a separate video. So definitely consider subscribing because I'll have vinyl haul videos, a couple videos just about my stereo setups, some specifics about my collection, and just life grabbing vinyl where I can, when I can. So to wrap this up, I wrote a little bit about what returning to analog music consumption has meant to me. And it's twofold. There is a positive element to it and a negative element. I am someone that can get really hooked on the rush of dopamine, the thrill of the hunt, the finding the diamond in the rough in a pile of junk in a basement or at an antique shop or at an estate sale. And I have to be careful because I can get a little obsessed about that pursuit, about those things. But at the same time, listening to music on vinyl, reconnecting with not only old albums, but artists I've never heard of, jazz, country, soul music, soundtracks that I haven't listened to in a long time, new wave, synth pop, dark wave, shoegaze, dream pop, records from all of these genres has created this new foundation and wellspring of inspiration for me and my work, both my photography and my YouTube channel, and then anything that I just personally work on that I don't end up sharing on the internet. This studio behind me, my stereo, all of that, this this has all come from reconnecting with music. And I have a video on my main channel that does, tells a story about my studio overhaul, because it didn't always look like this. And I'll put that link down in the description if you want to check it out. But the music has allowed me to connect with the energy and emotion of being alive, of life. It's allowed me to build community, make new friends, find new third places like the record shops, connecting with my brother-in-law about the records he has, the records I have, and going out record hunting together. So it's really been this sort of renaissance in my life, this rebirth that has really been inspiring and exciting, so much so that I've wanted to create this channel as a project to document my vinyl adventures and share them with all of you. Music has been a way for me to get away from a little device I call the magic rectangle, our phone, an iPad, a laptop, a computer screen. The magic rectangle that, sort of plays this siren song that gets you into its world on social media, watching YouTube, spending all your time staring at a screen instead of being out in the sun, meeting people, digging for treasure, finding things that not only are valuable as far as just, the money that they're worth and how much you spent to get it, but the value that it has just to you spiritually, to you emotionally, to you as a human being and a member of the collective consciousness we all have of, people living together. The people I've met while out record hunting, just incredible stories, incredible backgrounds, and just an exciting way to connect from people from all walks of life. I love being out on these adventures, building third places in community, feeling alive, and marking time with music, listening to new music so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when I hear that album, I go, oh, I remember I was working on my YouTube channel. I was in my studio. I was driving around in my truck, the windows down, spring, fall, winter, all that stuff. That's what music does. And I really had a good 10 plus year period where I was disconnected from current music. Sure, I would listen to some old stuff that I've listened to in the past, bring up that nostalgia, reconnect with those memories from those places. But what I really want to do is make all of these new memories. I want to chart time, making connections between what's happening to me in the present to the music that I'm listening to, even if it's new music, but from the past, from bands and artists I've never listened to or really heard their music. So that's what this channel is all about. Most of the videos that you'll see are going to be videos all about the vinyl hauls that I get when I'm out treasure hunting, at an estate sale, going through thrift store records, digging in the basement of an antique store, or sometimes just going record shopping, buying used records or new records at a local record shop or wherever I happen to be traveling to. So look forward to those videos. I want to do a video where I break down my vinyl collection, my cassette collection, my stereo setups. What else did I have there? And then maybe a video on my favorite, not the best albums of all time, but my favorite albums of all time. I think that'll be a good way to introduce myself to all of you in the vinyl community who are also well established, and maybe inspire other people in my situation, in their 40s, in their 30s, to reconnect with music through analog means. I already have a few friends of mine who, inspired by my social media posts and all of the passion I have about listening to music again through vinyl records, have invested in their own equipment and their own record collections. And that's been really exciting as well. So I just want to share the love. I want to help people get out of the magic rectangle. Although, please watch my videos and then go out and find vinyl records or cameras or whatever of your own. Get out there and make photographs, make work, spend time with your families, drive around in your car, listening to music with the windows down. Let's get back out there in the real world, connecting in real brick and mortar places, third places, building community, talking about these tangible things, everything, that I'm interested in: vinyl records, typewriters, vintage stereo equipment, cameras, the stuff that can help us form ourselves as individuals with unique expressions of who we are, but then also connect us with others so we can get back to being with each other and working with each other instead of being on our own, staring at the magic rectangle. Sorry, it got a little philosophical there towards the end and a little idealistic. I am a hopeless romantic and fully admit it. I'll have links down in the description to my other channels, including a podcast channel I have with my friend Alex, where we do talk about things like this and art and the creative life. Welcome to the channel. If you subscribe, thank you for subscribing. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to drop a comment and let me know your story as it relates to music. I'd love to hear it. That's all I've got for this one. I'll see you in the next one.